In this segment, I'm going to take a look at the object properties for an outline, and this time specifically how they relate to the Satin serial outline. So I'll go ahead and switch the object that has the running outline now with a special style and change it to the Satin serial outline. And the first thing you're going to want to do is just control the outline width, and that's found on your tool options, and right now it's set at a 1mm satin column, and I could go ahead and change it to 2mm and it gets fatter, and if I want to I could change it to 3mm, or any width of satin column that you want can be controlled. Now generally speaking, when you use a satin serial, you still have that ability to offset it. So if you wanted to offset it by 1mm, you have that ability. Let's just change it up to 1mm here. Well, that's 10. Whatever, you can offset it by 10mm if you want to. But anyway, the idea is you have that ability to still offset it with the satin serial. Now, patterns don't generally apply to satin stitches because, like I said before, they're really not meant to be carved up. They're meant to be a stitch on the outside, stitch on the outside, so I would suggest leaving it at none. It is possible, I guess, if you had a very wide satin outline that you might want to start applying some patterns to it, but that's just not the traditional use anyway. So, but you do have the ability. They will turn on. It's just I think you would need to have a pretty fat satin column before you would really start to even be able to see them. Now, I'll just skip over the remove overlaps and sequence for a moment, and those are generally the same as they were for the fill stitch tab. I don't believe there's any real difference. I think, in fact, you'll find that they're almost exactly the same, but let's just look. The difference being with the fill tab to the outline tab is when we choose a satin stitch outline, we have the ability to directly override or influence the density, the compensation, and the underlay, as opposed to on the fill stitch tab where we actually had to rely on the fabric settings to make those changes. With the satin outline, we can control specifically the density, compensation, or underlay. So I'll go ahead and talk about those now. Density really relates to the spacing between rows of stitches, and it's defaulted to 0.4 because my fabric right now is set for embroidery normal. But if I wanted to, I could change that to be 0.41 or 0.42 or 0.45 or 5, whatever, and if I hit enter, it will change. It will make that change. Now, if I zoom in, you can see here that's what we're talking about. Is the density is the distance between rows of stitches, and you can adjust what that density is going to be. You can also adjust the compensation, and the compensation really relates to well, it has to do with pull and the fact that when we stitch out an embroidery design, the stitches traveling back and forth create tension on the thread, and that combined with the give of our fabric tends to make things get a little bit smaller. And so most embroidery software is going to be set up with compensation, and that's what this is here. So if we increase our compensation, all that's really going to do is fatten up the satin column to make more compensation than less. And the last setting that we can control in here is the underlay choice, and now we have direct control over the type of underlay choices we get. Now I'll see if I pop up this list, you can see here that we could choose from tracking to single underlay to double underlay to zigzag underlay to cross underlay, zigzag plus, which means zigzag plus a double, cross plus, which is going to give you the cross plus a double, netting and netting plus, and we also have double zigzag and double zigzag plus. And I'm just going to leave it, I guess right now it's set on cross. So let's just take a look at what that looks like if we go to slow redraw and push start. So the cross is giving me more or less a zigzag underlay, but in the regular zigzag underlay, the stitches travel the shortest distance across the shape, same as the satin stitch column that comes on top. But with this cross underlay, the zigzags have been rotated onto a bit of an angle, looks like 45 degrees, and so it gives a longer zigzag effect. And so that's the cross. Now, if I wanted to, I could change it. Let's just, I guess, why don't we look at zigzag, and then we'll go ahead and do the slow redraw and see the difference. So now we have a zigzag underlay versus that cross underlay, and then of course the satin column comes on top. I'll stop it and select it again, and this time why don't we go to cross plus and see what that gives us. So again, slow redraw, push start. So here we get an edge underlay where it's going to travel around both edges, and then it's going to give us the cross. And when it completes the cross, then it's going to go ahead and finish this satin stitch column. So embroidery, if you haven't guessed, embroidery underlay is quite important. This is what's going to give you a better sewing result, or it's going to change your sewing results. So embroidery left with very little underlay tends to be flat and may sink into your fabric. That said, maybe we're creating something that's meant to be shading and we don't want it. We purposely want that stitching to sink into the layer below, and therefore we might want to have as little underlay as possible. So you have the ability to override and control your underlay. So if I go to double zigzag plus, then I'm going to have lots of underlay here. So we're going to have the edge run, and then we'll have a zigzag going at two different directions. So there'll be a zigzag, that's going to be the first pass of zigzag, then a second pass of zigzag, and then we have the satin column. So all of that said, when you choose an object, it's the object properties is how you're able to control the settings for the outline and the weave fill. And the more you learn to take control of these settings, then the more you'll be able to influence how the overall stitching result of your design is. So yeah, that's the object properties. I'm going to come back with another segment and just talk again about remove overlaps and just look at how that applies with outline objects.